Welcome back to episode 3 of Talking Talent. Today I'm very excited because I get to chat with two amazing senior HR leaders. We could have talked for 3 hours, but instead we give you 30 solid minutes discussing their path into the C-suite, some lessons learned along the way, and some trends for the future. Hope you enjoy the episode, and don't forget to subscribe. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this third episode of Talking Talent. We'd love if you tell your friends about it, your coworkers about it, subscribe to it on Spotify. As you know, I'm Sam McCarthy, and I lead the HR practice at Cordia Resources. And I am joined today by two amazing guests and people I've had the pleasure of working with recently. First, I am joined by Marguerite Eastwood, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
And Dominique Taylor, who is the Chief People Officer at Axios. Thanks for joining, Dominique.
Hey, Sam.
So we've been really excited about both guests, and I've had the opportunity to work with both as clients of Cordia in the past few months. So really exciting to do this today. Thank you both for joining. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about both of their paths to the C-suite, to leadership positions in organizations that have a lot of influence. We're going to talk about their advice for HR professionals who want to climb that ladder into decision-making roles, and some about the future of work and where that's heading. So let's get to it. First question for both of you. We talked a lot. I've talked before in previous episodes about this. When you first started working, whether it was a full-time job, a part-time job, what was that first job that you had? And did that in any way have any translation into you then going down the path of being a human resources professional? Dominique, why don't you start us off?
Sure. My very first job was actually as a newspaper delivery person, a bike route. I don't think it necessarily led me into human resources, although I think I can say now it maybe was my first foray into media. It definitely taught me the importance of customer service and managing expectations. But I did not ever think I would be in human resources. I eventually landed here after starting my career in consulting and then discovering that startups actually existed in DC. I thought they all lived in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, but discovered that there was some here, and was able to get hired as the head of recruiting at a ed tech startup, and eventually built out their HR function and continued that a couple times until I made my way to Axios.
Very good. Thank you. Now it always seemed like that would have been a fun job, delivering newspapers, like you see in movies, like the kids who are delivering papers on their bike at when it's barely light out, and it seems like it would be a fun job. I never really lived in a neighborhood where I could get on a bike and deliver papers or walk around. I lived on like dangerous roads in like suburban or rural areas where I would have been terrible, but that's very cool. Thank you for sharing.
It was not a fun job.
It wasn't? Okay.
But at age 12, it paid well. So.
Wow, age 12. That is okay. That is fantastic. Marguerite, how about you?
So I'll go along the theme with not the greatest first job or funnest first job ever. I worked at the public library shelving books, and I was 15, and you weren't allowed to talk. And one thing I learned from that job is I cannot have a job where I can't talk. It's not a good mix with my personality, and maybe that didn't land me in HR, but that helped me realize the kind of jobs that I wanted to be in and the kind I didn't want to be in. But a funny story about how I ended up in HR. So I was a broadcast journalism major, so think talking and listening. And I always wanted to be a broadcast journalist. And while I was looking for a job in the middle of the recession, in 1991, I realized I didn't really want that job as much as everyone else did. And my friend, who was also looking for a job during that recession in broadcast journalism, his sister had just finished a master's degree in the labor and relations program at Illinois. And I met her and I said, oh my gosh, I want to do this. And that's how I ended up in HR.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny because almost anybody I talk with, whether they're at the level that you both are at or somebody who's just getting in, it's so rare that you see on resumes. I mean, only so many schools have a bachelor's degree and an undergraduate degree in human resources. There are a number of schools, and more so now, that have a master's degree in it. But it's very rare that someone has a job right out of school, or even if they don't have a college degree, that you always make your way into it. And it's almost like people will say, well, I was kind of forced into it. I had an administrative role, and then they started having me enter payroll, and then I started learning about the benefits, and then I had to fire somebody. And then it's like, okay, I guess you're the human resources manager as well as running, the office. So it's always interesting to see how people get into it. But and you both worked for some, prior in your career in different industries for some very large, well-known companies. I'd recommend everyone listening to look both up. Some really interesting backgrounds. So thank you for sharing that. So let's get into some topics here. And as I mentioned, is working with you both and getting to know you the past few months. I know that you're one of the big asks when you're in a role that you both have is whether you are building the team, whether that's from whether you're growing or whether you're reorganizing or rethinking what that team looks like. You have a lot on your plate when it comes to the vision and the strategy behind that. And there's a lot of ways to go about it. So I know, Dominique, you're growing a team, you're adding positions, a lot of things that maybe haven't existed before. And Marguerite, you're reorganizing a team and also figuring out a new strategy. So I want to ask you both about that, different angles and approaches, but would love to hear about how you go about that, how you work with leadership in those roles. So Dominique, let's first talk about growth. What's going on at Axios right now?
Yeah, a lot of growth, which is exciting and sometimes terrifying, depending on the day. When I started, we were a little under 100 folks, and I had a small but mighty team of 5, wearing many hats, doing all the things. And it was sort of the classic team of athletes where we all our roles spanned a lot of different things. But as the company grew, we had to start to build out functions and specializations to make sure we were serving the company. And that's what we've done. Sort of, I've had to understand where's the company going, and how do we make sure we have the things that the organization and everyone needs in order to be successful. So from a team of 5 to a team of 30 now, as we break 500 any minute now. And we've got HR business partners, we've got recruiters, we've got employee experience specialists, we've got compliance, but really sort of shifting from being athletes to focus and specialization to meet the needs of our organization.
That's fantastic. And you've obviously done a great job for advocating for it. You have a great ratio in terms of the number of professionals you have in your group compared to total headcount in the company. And you just fit, and that's, how the human resources function can add value and not just be a transactional, but add value to the organization. I know, Marguerite, you're looking at some similar things when you started. It's been what, almost 8-9 months now? Yeah. So tell me about what you're doing at Youth Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came in October, and there were a couple of positions that were open, and just like from a reorganization standpoint, because that's where we are, I didn't want to fill those positions right away with the exact same people who were here before, because I was sort of brought in to take a look at the function and figure out best practices from some of the larger organizations that I've worked for in the past. And it took me a couple of months to do my listening tour. I wanted to listen to stakeholders. So I wanted to hear from the leaders. I wanted to hear from the employees. I really wanted to hear from my team about what pains and pain points and like what they would like to see. I interacted with the compensation committee of the board. So I sort of got the lay of the land, and I realized that I needed a model very similar to what Dominique just mentioned. So we implemented an HR business partner model. We separated out talent acquisition as a separate team, and then we have sort of our total rewards shared services team, although that would be a stretch because we're so small with 11 people on our team. That might be stretching it a little bit, but the model that you might imagine, but really being very thoughtful about your talent that you have and making sure that the things that they're good at and they want to do, that they end up in the right positions, and then not rushing to hire right away when you get into a new organization until you can figure out what's really needed. And I will say I'm really glad I did that, because the HR business partner model is working really well so far. We're just at the beginning of it, but the organization is very grateful for this model.
And I know you both there are probably some roadblocks, right? There were some things that you asked for that may not happen for 6 months, a year, 2 years. How did you get past some of those roadblocks, and how did you figure out, here's the low hanging fruit, here's the easy stuff I can ask about, but I'm sure there were some sacrifices made as well.
Dominique, you want to go first?
Yeah, I was trying to think about that. I mean, one of the things that I've been fortunate at with Axios is that there's such a prioritization of people and human resources and culture, which is why I have sort of the team that I have. And we've put such a strong emphasis and investment into this. We really understand and acknowledge that our greatest resource is our people. And so there's been, for the most part, I've had the luxury of being able to design and implement and experiment, where we've wanted as much as possible. I think if anything, our biggest challenge right now is this crazy labor market. We haven't really had to wrestle too much with crazy turnover, but just this really tight labor market and inflation has been really challenging for us as an organization right now.
I think for me, it's more coming into an organization where I need to lay the foundational groundwork. And, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like we need to get the technology in place. We need to make sure that the data is in a way in which we can use it then to analyze, do some analytics. And we're really focusing on that. And so that slows you down, because everybody wants the top of the, self-actualization. Everybody wants modern strategic talent planning. And it's whoa. I know this is boring, but we have got to make sure that the data at the bottom end of the hierarchy of needs and some of the basic things that we do, we've got to get that in place before we can get to self-actualization. So I would say that's probably where I work right now, the current challenge.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. It's a huge, it's such an important topic, and there are some people that I work with and some organizations who are in that 100, 200 employees. You might have an HR director, a generalist, maybe one person doing recruiting, and they're going through the growth that Axios has gone through. And they're trying to advocate for what they need. And the leadership it's such a challenge to come to the table with the right solutions and kind of say, prove to me that you have the right mix of employees. And, here's this budget you have to work with, kind of prove that this is necessary. And human resources, you guys both know, human resources you're always trying to do more with less. It's always usually the most lean group that there is. I think that the last couple of years in COVID-19 kind of changing all of our lives has changed, I think, for the better, the way that companies have envisioned what they need, and being I might work with a CFO or the CEO of a growing company who says, hey, we tried this before. We tried to hire somebody. We tried to do it on our own. It didn't work. kind of, take this process from me and help because we've made mistakes in the past. I've been stubborn about it. And so I think that's a challenge. And it is, I think for people who are listening, don't get discouraged. But if you do have a challenge your organization, come with a solution. If you have a complaint, if you have something that you want to, come with a solution and know that the whole thing may not be implemented. But at the end of the day, if you can get some small wins along the way, that's a great way to go.
And this actually reminded me. One of the things when we were sort of heavy in the pandemic and trying to stretch our team, I realized that we were outpacing on hiring, and I actually hadn't scaled up my team as much as I should have, and went and made a proposal. A lot of the classic thinking around staffing for HR is just like percentage of headcount, but that just wasn't sort of netting out in terms of what I knew I needed. And so I actually looked at measuring, okay, how many people are we hiring? How many people are leaving? And then what is our headcount? And when I looked at that measure of workload was much more realistic to what we were feeling and what we were actually dealing with than just headcount. And I did some cuts of analysis that way and presented it to the founders and made the case for, basically doubling the size of my team. And they were like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And we need this investment because at any time, more than now ever, like this is where we need to be supporting our people and making sure we have this team set. So thinking creatively, I think, especially in our industry, and not always relying on what the past thinking has been, can also help as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And one of the things that I learned in my last organization when I was the chief HR officer at a global law firm, and I am bringing with me, is to be scrappy. So we don't have to hire a firm to do everything for us. We can figure it out on our own. And we're implementing a talent review process because of a business need that we have right now. And one of my HR business partners is out there like researching and being scrappy, and we're going to put it together ourselves. I don't have the budget to like hire someone to do that because I need my budget to do some other things where I don't have the means to do it inside. So I've always been a big fan of let's be scrappy and figure out if we can do this ourselves without having to, spend a lot of money on it.
No, thank you for sharing. I appreciate the feedback there. Now, I know that there are, along the way, in different roles you've had in your growth in both of your careers, there have been a lot of successes, but I'm sure there have been, I hesitate to use the word failures, but lessons learned that came from a decision you made, maybe a mistake you made that you learned from. Is there one thing that you can both share for everybody that either change the way you think about how you wanted to grow your career, or just one thing that sticks out in your mind? Marguerite, how about you go first?
Oh, I'm being put on the spot first here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say I have changed industries a lot. So if anybody has looked at my LinkedIn profile, I started out in the pharmaceutical industry as an HR person, and then turned into a leader. And then I moved to biotech, which is pretty similar. Then I moved to consulting and government contracting. Then I moved to global law. And now I'm at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And one of the mistakes that I made earlier in my career was expecting that the people and how you share information with people and how you sell them on certain ideas would be similar from one industry to a next. And it's so funny because they are all so different. Like you like pharmaceutical and biotech, you needed like data and analytics. In consulting, you need to be like the loudest voice in the room. In the law firm, you needed to have a really good written document that like words matter. And I think I'm still figuring it out at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But I remember making some mistakes whenever I would change industries, like sort of developing my talking points and developing my sort of strategy based on the old industry, and then I'm in this new industry and it's like, oh, that's not going to work for me anymore. I have to figure out the new way of doing things.
Yeah. I would say similarly, I've always been of the opinion of just like put your head down, do good work, and it speaks for yourself, and you don't have to worry about anything else. And like that, unfortunately, just isn't always true. And getting comfortable advocating for yourself, building relationships, taking credit for work actually matters. And it can feel uncomfortable or like you're not being humble, but there's power there. And I actually had a colleague on my team who the way she helped me see it as like, you're advocating for me. And as soon as I saw it that way, I was like, oh, I can do this. She's like, yeah, just think of it as like you're helping me. And I was like, okay, yeah, no. Then I've got this. But that was a really important lesson for me, that the work, especially our work, can be very hidden. So making sure you're finding ways to draw attention to it. And then in HR especially, I've also learned the importance of quantifying our work because it isn't always measurable. So I'm notorious for like always sending a survey, asking for feedback so I can then say, well, 90% of the folks who attended this gave it a 5, or just anything to be able to show impact of the work that the team is doing. Learned that as a consultant for sure.
I was going to say, yeah, you have some consulting in your background, and parlay that into your HR career. So I'm sure you definitely can understand that too. So there's a lot of we could probably talk about the future of work and what that means from a lot of different angles for 2 hours. But is there one thing on each of your minds in terms of the future of work that has, and obviously has been transformed the last couple of years in a lot of different ways? Is there one thing that you think is a trend, something coming up in the next six months to a year, or just something that maybe people aren't talking about, that articles aren't being written about right now, that you're either doing in your organization or that you're particularly passionate about?
I mean, one thing the like remote first hybrid, everything is definitely top of mind. I think one thing I'm obsessing on is onboarding and how you build connections. And where are the moments where you bring people together, even if you are embracing a remote first environment, because there's still power in that. And one of the things I think about a lot that we talk a lot about here is like switching costs, for lack of a better term, of jobs are a lot lower when you don't have that in-person experience and those relationships that you build in person anymore. So how can you try to build parallel relationships or connectivity so that those switching costs aren't as low for folks and they still feel like they belong and that they're part of the organization? That's something that's keeping me up at night for sure.
I totally agree with that, having joined an organization during the pandemic and meeting people in person is so important. And I'm lucky because there are people in person in my organization. I can't imagine what it would have been like if the entire thing was on a screen.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about, which is not written about a lot, but I don't know that it's completely unique, but I'm looking into training for leaders and for staff on how to make the experience of hybrid work the most successful that it can be through moments that matter. What you talked about, Dominique, when you bring people together, making sure that they're moments that matter and not just like, well, you have to be in the office this day, and really focusing in on the skill set of leading in a hybrid work environment. And then as an employee, like knowing that my leader is really focusing on this and building skills in this area. What can I do to embrace this hybrid work environment? And what do I need to do differently in order to make this new way of work successful?
Yeah. I love the idea of moments that matter. And I do think one of the things that organizations aren't doing well is that they're just defaulting to like forcing people back without thinking about, making it meaningful and doing more like carrot instead of stick. Like let's make it an enjoyable experience so people want to come back instead of have to come back.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. Yeah, we could probably. I like moments that matter too. That is a great. That's a great term. It is. It's what is the business? What is the business case? What is the business case for this? And and so that is a great way to put it. I think I think the other thing is, managing your own time. I'd say, are there any tips that you've each had over the, again, I don't want, I always say, like, pre and post COVID, it's hard to get away from it. But let's say over the past few years, are you managing your time better? How do you turn it? How do you shut it off? And how do you decide when you're either not available to people every second of the day? Do you feel like you're managing your time better in May 2022 than you were in March 2020? What does that look like over the past few years for you both?
Better?
It may not be, but I mean, I know the days
Yeah.
of, hey, I'm available from 9 to 5 and everyone comes in and leaves at the same time. I mean, that was gone pre March 2020 anyway. But, I do some of my best work between 7 and 9 o'clock at night when I'm able to sit down and relax and not have people calling me. And that's not a bad thing, everyone.
Yep.
But are you seeing that too? How do you turn it
Yeah.
off? When are you not available for your teams?
So I've always believed more, we not necessarily like work-life balance, because that can sometimes bring up, sort of this like rigid idea of like 9 to 5 and then there's nothing more like work-life flex. Or like, I also like, I love my job. So like, I don't mind working. Like it brings me joy and happiness and fulfillment. But I also have 4 children. So like, I need time with them. So what I've always explained to my team is that like early mornings, I'm unlikely to be available because it's just chaos in my house. And then I try to leave work at a normal hour, or at least in the before times, so that I could go home, have dinner, bedtime with them. And then I would hop online to catch up on work, because I'm a bit of a night owl. That's when I have some productive time. Before you could like schedule emails, like that has been a godsend. But before you could do that, and I would send emails out late at night, I had to tell my team, like, please don't respond. I'm not expecting you to respond. And when you do respond, you're just creating more work for me.
Yeah.
So let's just agree, like, if it's an emergency, I know how to find you. But I've always appreciated organizations that just offer flexibility and are like, you're an adult, you know how to do your best work, set your schedule, and if we need to meet, we'll figure out, times to meet.
Yeah, I will totally agree with you, Dominique. And wow, I am in awe of you with 4 kids
It's
and
just chaos.
working. That's great. I only have 2. And that seemed like a handful. And now they're both in college. So I'm a new empty nester. But I also like sort of having those boundaries. And then with my team, I like being able to, us having an open channel where, like, if we need to get a hold of each other, we're going to text, but we're not going to abuse it.
Yeah.
And I am a huge fan of delay delivery emails. In fact, this weekend I was churning out emails because I actually wanted to work on the weekend because I also love my job. And there were just things where I needed like 3 hours to quietly think and strategize. And like, I just can't do that in the office.
Yeah.
And so, but then always I do delay delivery on those emails, and I make sure that they're not going out until Monday morning, because I don't want people to feel like that, oh my gosh, she's emailing me over the weekend and I need to do something about it. I will say for all of the people who haven't yet been back into the office, or they're like slowly moving into the office, the one benefit of being in the office is it's sort of known that you have to get in public transit or in your car to go home. And so it does like put this end time on. And then you do have this thing, because I've been coming back here since like October, where there's this wind down period where you're in your travels and you're like relaxing, well, sort of, with DC traffic, maybe not, but you're thinking about other things. And it does like I have a lot more energy at home if I'm in the office working than if I'm at home and then I end at like 7 o'clock at night, because there's no break period. And I truly believe in that. So it is sort of like, if you don't do that, if you're working from home all the time, I highly recommend that you do something else to make that break in your day. And Dominique, I don't know if you have the bandwidth to be able to do that, but it's so important and
Yeah.
meaningful to shift.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing too that we try to emphasize here is taking time off the grid. So that has been huge. And then the other big thing that we implemented a while ago now is no meeting zones on Friday afternoons. Because what we found is people were in back-to-back Zooms inevitably on Fridays. They would hit 5 o'clock, have an inbox that was just clogged, that would then just loom over them in the weekends or force weekend work if they didn't want to work. And it just was ruining and burning people out. So that no meeting zone has been a godsend, just to be able to do focused work, to sort of ease into the weekend, and help as well. So any of
I
those
love
things
that.
that just help transition make a big difference.
Yeah, I know I know I sprung that question on you guys. We didn't talk about that before, but as you were talking, I was just thinking, I've gotten emails from both of you at 11 o'clock at night or in the morning, and I do the same thing. And it is what it is. It's hard to, but communicating out to your teams, for those people who are listening, over communicate that, like Dominique said, you don't just because I'm working, because this is a time window I have available to me, doesn't mean that I want you to respond. Or if I send you a message on Slack or Teams or whatever it is, and we're communicating internally, it doesn't mean that you have to get back to me right now. So being very intentional about that. I've seen a lot of times when that's not the case and people get burnt out because there's not that communication. So I think really, really important.
Yeah.
Well, anything else to add? Any other tips? Otherwise, we can wrap this up. I really appreciate both of your times.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Always one of my favorite topics.
Yes, absolutely. This has been fun.
Well, good. Well, I can't say I won't ask you to ever come back. Maybe a year from now, we'll check in and see how everything is going. But for those of you, again, please subscribe, share this, and feel free to look up both Marguerite and Dominique on LinkedIn. Connect with them, and we'll really appreciate you listening. So thank you both again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll chat again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.